Welcome to The Nation. Well, the Prime Minister moved to clear the decks this week on what has been one of the most troubled policy areas for Labor, asylum seekers. In an extraordinary backflip, Labor has now not only embraced offshore processing, but Nauru and Manus Island, the two offshore processing centres that for years it's railed against. It is a case of short-term pain, long-term gain. Labor hoping that this will remove the whole asylum seeker issue from the agenda. But will it work? And will it deny the coalition what has been one of its favourite weapons against Labor over the years? Well, joining us this week, Labor MP Ed Husic, the former New South Wales Liberal leader Kerry Chikarovski, former Immigration Minister in the Keating government Jerry Hand, who was responsible for introducing mandatory detention in the first place, and Liberal MP Josh Frydenberg. Welcome to you all. Let's, Ed Husic, start with you. The Prime Minister and other ministers this week have conceded that this has been a compromise from the government to go with Nauru and Manus Island. No one has yet, though, admitted from Labor that you've got it wrong in the past when it comes to border protection, resisting these options for so long. No one's expressed any regret. Are you willing to do that?
Well, I look at it in terms of the present situation. The present situation demands a response. The present situation where people are drowning making that trip, the two-day trip from Indonesia to here, and the reality demands of us a policy response that can address that issue.
I can understand why you want to focus on the present, but did Labor get it wrong in the past?
Well, no, because we've basically, as I said, policy should adjust to the circumstances. And from my perspective, those deaths, it's just intolerable to continue a situation where people are dying.
I don't think anyone
and to be able to have the...
This has been the same situation for 12 months. 12 months ago, the High Court knocked off the Malaysia plan that the government favoured. People were dying, people were trying to get to Australia then. Why not do this 12 months ago?
Well, because we had sought to find a way within this Parliament to have the Malaysia arrangement be successfully implemented, because we believe that, and it's pretty much been borne out by the Houston report this week, in an area, in a region where you have 4 million, nearly 25% of the world's refugees, you need to have a regional answer to this issue. And we believe that this was, and as described by the Houston report, an important building block, and we were trying to get that through. It wasn't, we just couldn't do that within this Parliament.
But it also needs more work, according to the Houston report. It needs legally binding protections and safeguards, and they don't exist under that Malaysia plan.
And what is important is that they highlight that this is something that we should definitely be working towards, that in their words they say it should not be neglected and it should not be left aside. It's something to build upon.
Jerry Hand, I'm keen to see what you think about this policy. Labor has gone through contortions over asylum seekers. What do you think where they've landed?
Well, I think the report's an excellent report, but every single recommendation in that report has to be implemented. If it's not, the exercise of this week is a sleight of hand. Because unless you go the full Monty and do what they said, and do what Angus Houston said, and Paris, implement them all, get the regional concept up, this has just been a bit of a sideshow, getting Nauru up.
Well, do you, though, think that the short-term answer of going with Nauru and Manus Island is a good idea?
I personally have great difficulty with the offshore, but I've come to realise that the only way to break the situation from continuing was to go with what was agreed by the Parliament.
Are you willing to say that Labor got it wrong?
I think they did.
Came to power?
Absolutely, and I think they got it wrong. I think the intentions were marvellous, but you see, when you make a decision, you don't worry about that decision. You always worry about the decision that comes next and the one after that.
So, Ed Husic, why can't you say that in hindsight your intentions were right, but you were wrong to dismantle the Pacific
because I don't agree with respectfully, I don't agree. Insofar as you look at the regional situation, most of our neighbours dealt with an upswing in people who are arriving on their doors. Indonesia had a lot of people from Afghanistan. Malaysia had a lot of people from Myanmar. We had people from Afghanistan and Sri Lanka in that post-2009-2010 period. Bearing in mind too, the US, Australia, most of the West refocused on Afghanistan.
Sure, but there were particular
and that did lead to a lot of people
Yeah, but there were
seeking
particular
refuge.
pull factors for them coming to Australia. The Houston report makes that very clear. It talks about these pull factors being significant. That's something Labor denied at the time.
Well, it talks about pull and push factors, and it talks about pull factors being, for the bulk of people who are seeking refuge, 80% of them go to the country nearest to them, and there are about 20% who look at, other factors, for example, economic security, for instance, that drives them to make that decision.
Josh Frydenberg, let's bring you in. As Jerry Hand says, this is a report that is intended to be accepted in total. 22 recommendations taken as a whole. Do you agree that it should be taken as a whole?
No, I don't. But firstly, I just want to correct the record here because Ed's got a bit of amnesia and so does his Labor colleagues. In the 3 years before 2001, there were more than 12,000 unauthorised arrivals to this country on 160 boats. John Howard implemented that tripartite suite of measures which included towing back the boats, the TPVs and the offshore processing. The net result of that was that in the 6 years after 2001-2, only 272 people came in 16 boats.
I don't want to spend too long
so
talking
that policy
about
works.
past history, but
Sure.
the question is, should this report be accepted as whole? And you've said no. Why not? What shouldn't be
Well, firstly, Malaysia shouldn't be accepted because Malaysia is not a signatory to the 1951 Refugees Convention, and we do not believe that human rights can be guaranteed there, and it was knocked out by the High Court.
But hang on, I thought the Coalition's policy was, even if it doesn't sign the Refugees Convention, as long as it makes legally binding commitments to protect these people, then that's good enough.
No, I don't think that it is going to happen.
But isn't that Coalition policy?
No, well, the Coalition's policy is we don't support Malaysia. And, you're talking about a
But hang on, do you know what the Coalition policy is?
Absolutely. And you're talking about a hypothetical. Well, the Coalition policy is we do not accept Malaysia in its current form. And
No, but would you accept Malaysia if it made legally binding commitments?
To what? To protect human rights?
Yeah, to give them the health, education, work rights that are part of the plan.
Look, we'd have to see when that comes to the Parliament in the legislation. But you're talking about hypotheticals.
I'm asking if you would accept a plan that involves legally binding commitments from Malaysia. Yes or no?
I mean, I don't think Malaysia is the right solution, and I think a lot of colleagues on my side would agree with that, and we've made it abundantly clear.
Yeah, but I'm trying to establish why. Is it because legally binding commitments make it okay or not?
But what are legally binding commitments? I mean,
Well, they're
Malaysia
commitments
is not...
that are guaranteed in law.
Well, about what? About human rights protections? I mean, they haven't signed
think
up
you're
to
obfuscating
But
here,
they haven't signed up to the Refugee Convention, and the Refugee Convention lays out
Neither does the US,
certain
by the way.
requirements.
Neither does the US.
I think you'll find the Coalition policy is as long as they're legally binding commitments, then you'd be willing to...
No, as long as they're politically convenient.
No, we're dealing with hypotheticals. So can I just say, I don't think Malaysia will be accepted by the Coalition. We've made that
Under any
abundantly clear.
circumstances.
Well, I can't see the situation where they're going to get these legally
that's the
binding
Kerry Chikarovsky,
commitments by
let's-
Malaysia.
Look, I actually think that the difficulty with Malaysia, and I'm not in the coalition in Canberra, but I think as a layperson looking at this now, I think the difficulty about Malaysia, as opposed to Manus and to Nauru, is that Malaysia would not be under Australian control. Manus and Nauru will be operated by Australians, subject to the conditions that we as Australians would expect. And I know that there's been a lot of stuff from refugee advocates saying, oh, it's inhumane to put people into those facilities. But I can be absolutely confident in saying that those facilities will be very well-run facilities, and all the sorts of things that you've just spoken about, education, health, proper housing, proper food, they will be provided. Now, as a person who's not directly involved in the debate in Canberra, what concerns me about relying on other countries to provide those sorts of facilities is that we would be relying on those other countries. We take responsibility for the people coming to this country. We process them as they should be processed. I'm actually going to take a bit of credit here, David, because I sat on your show several months ago and I said we should reopen Manus, we should reopen Nauru, and we should increase the humanitarian intake to 20,000. You probably don't remember it. But I mean, I thought at that time that was a good solution.
I think we should call it the Kerry Chikarovsky
Well, actually,
solution.
no. My understanding is, according to the Australian this weekend, is that it was actually the Chris Bowen solution, and he took that to cabinet.
Well, correct.
He took that to
he got
cabinet.
rolled by cabinet.
And he got rolled by
ago.
cabinet. And had they they accepted it in Cabinet 12 months ago, then we wouldn't be talking about, I believe, the
Let me
extent of
ask you this.
tragedy.
If you and your family were in this situation of trying to get out of trouble and find asylum somewhere, would you rather go to Malaysia, be sent to Malaysia, where you would have work rights, which were part of this
And
plan,
education.
and education, or some education,
not really,
not mainstream schooling, as
Not
far as I'm aware.
not hospitals in the way.
Or would you rather be sent to Nauru for an indefinite period of time? Could be 5 years, could be more, where you're stuck on Nauru indefinitely. Yes, you'd have the food and shelter and all
And
of
the
that. but
education
pretty
and-
basic, you would think.
Yeah, well, I mean,
What would you go for?
I've not been to Nauru, so I don't know what it looked like when it was operating, but I'm told by others who've been that it was a reasonable facility.
So you'd rather Nauru?
Look, I think I'd rather know that I was in a position where my children were getting educated. They were available to have the best health care that could possibly be provided. And that's the sort of, that I think as a person worrying about my future.
So Malaysia would be a stronger deterrent then?
To actually, if you were not, to say that you'll end up in Malaysia
If
and
you'd prefer
stay
to be
there.
in Nauru, then Malaysia would be a stronger deterrent.
I suppose the whole fallacy in the debate, though, is that, what is going to deter people to stop getting on boats anyway? And,
It's a suite of measures. I mean, that's the
and I
reality.
haven't seen anything
No,
yet.
that's what they're talking about. And the reality is, in our
22 of
neighbourhood, there aren't too many people who've signed the convention. However, Malaysia,
Nauru
and
has.
can I just say, I mean, some of the stuff that you said, Josh, is what prompted the Malaysian High Commissioner to write last week to members of Parliament saying, we understand that politics is feisty, or words to that effect, but we have a pretty good record on refugees. I mean, they helped in the resettlement of over 250,000 Vietnamese. They'd been working with the UNHCR over many years. We have deep relationships with a great ally in Malaysia. I mean, we have the 5 power defence arrangements we've had for over 40 years. And what the coalition has been doing is bagging out a good neighbour that we need in our neighbourhood to help us solve a regional issue. So if you're saying, that they are such a bad government and that their regime is so bad, why you will obviously maintain the existing arrangements we have on a whole suite of issues.
Why then has the Houston Committee said that it's not workable at the moment?
No, they have said that they believe that longer term this is something that has to be dealt with, and in fact Paris Aristotle said I wouldn't support anything that didn't
So let me
include
ask you
Malaysia.
this. Let me ask you this. Will Labor continue to work on Malaysia, or is this going to drop off the
From
radar
my preference,
quietly?
I hope they do.
Has
we
any
do.
contact been made with the Malaysian government this week at all?
Well, I can't answer. Obviously, I can't answer that. I've been busy changing nappies.
We should point out that music was
Can I just say-
8 days ago become a dad. So
David, can I just say, there's great hypocrisy here. I mean, 5 years ago, when John Howard was taken from office, effectively replaced by Kevin Rudd, he unravelled a very successful policy, a policy that had stopped the boats. And suddenly we're in this situation where more than 22,000 people have come, more than 360 boats, costed $4.5 billion to taxpayers, and tragically, more than 1,000 people have lost their lives at sea.
That's not true.
What?
See,
What's not true?
that lie has been said over and over and over in this debate. 1,000 deaths. 350 of the deaths were in 2001. Labor was not in power.
No.
Now, if you're going to quote this populist talk
so
back
tell me how many
radio,
deaths.
1,000
So how many deaths?
Well,
And
I'm
there's
saying,
got no
Okay,
but
I'll
at
quote
least tell the truth.
the Houston report says 604 since October of 2009.
That's the problem with the debate.
So it's all,
That's the problem with the debate.
But Jerry Hand, you've got to acknowledge that's a lot
It's
of people who've
tragic,
lost their
and
lives.
it happened on a road. We closed the road, and it's outrageous that it's happened. I agree.
And it's
But
taken so
I
long.
sat and watched the debate, and I heard speaker after speaker accuse the Prime Minister and the Minister and sheeted home to them that they were the reason 1,000 people drowned.
Well, it
now,
can't
if
be
that's the case, Kerry, now hang on, if that's the case, every minister that's been responsible for prisons or whatever is personally responsible for tragedies
Hey, come on,
occur.
Jerry.
Now, listen, no,
but it's
I'm a
akin
bit
to-
sensitive to
But
this.
you can't-
I was the minister, and I had to put up with people in custody and people jumping off roofs and the injuries. It's not very pleasant. It's not very pleasant.
But you can't
And
blame Chris.
I object whether it was John Howard or anybody else being blamed for things that they have no control over.
But you
It's
can't
not
blame
fair.
Chris Bowen, because Chris Bowen actually tried to do something about
Yeah,
it, and he got rolled.
Well, I'm just pulling up on a point, because that's the trouble with this
Can
debate.
I just say, the other thing that the Houston report pointed out was that for the first time in 35 years of the humanitarian visas being offered, in 2011-12 there were more humanitarian visas given onshore than offshore.
That's right. Yeah,
And that's right, isn't it? So the net result of their failure to protect the borders has meant that thousands of people waiting in camps overseas
Yeah, but
to
you
come
can
to
wear some of
Australia.
that failure too.
No, hang on. Thousands of people waiting in camps overseas to come here have been denied an opportunity
A
that's
key
why-
part of this
that's why-
new Pacific solution is this no advantage test, which will mean that those who are sent to Nauru and Manasala are given no advantage over those who would apply and waiting in camps in Indonesia,
And the
Malaysia
changes to
and
family
elsewhere in the region. This could well mean, though, Ed Husick, that people are there for years on end. They've been processed, perhaps, found to be refugees, genuine refugees, and yet what? You leave them languishing in Nauru for as long as it would take someone in a camp elsewhere.
No one wants people to be languishing. I mean, I have constituents in the
But that's
in the
the point-
electorate that
that's
I
the point
represent
of this,
that sat
policy.
in
Do you want to
that sat in camps for 10 years. Offshore, in camps, waiting for their place to come up to be able to come to Australia. So no one wants that. But at the same time, too, you do need to work out a way to ensure that you can decouple, if you like, the ability of people who are, if you compare the people that are sitting in camps versus the people who come here by boat, that those people who come here by boat aren't processed.
So what
quicker.
is a reasonable
So it is
period
going to be,
of time? What's reasonable?
well, but that's so subjective, David. I mean, you're asking, we could ask every person here and every person outside, and they'll come
Well, I
up
will
with
ask
different
everyone. You
points.
don't worry about that. I'm asking you, though. What do you think's reasonable? I know it's subjective.
Look, I'm not going to put a figure on it, frankly, because you just can't say, with any, because it's such a subjective position.
Kerry
you can't
Chikarovsky, do
say.
you think 5 years, 10 years is too long to leave someone in Nauru?
But I'm assuming that's the logic behind saying to people who are in those camps now and who are thinking about getting on a boat that you're not going to get any advantage. You may as well stay where you are and be processed where you are. And that, to me, is why they're talking about this measure as a deterrent.
But they're
People
going
are
to have to put it into practice as well.
Yeah, but the reality will be, I mean, it's going to take a little while, but Josh would argue, and I think quite correctly, Josh will argue that once that message does get through,
Less people come.
less people come, because if they know that they're going, and look, as I said, all I know about Nauru, other than detention centres, is that it's the world's largest guano producer, which is not a particularly great thing to talk about as an island.
Not a great draw card.
No, not a great draw card.
Josh-
But if you get that, I mean, if you start to get that message that that's where you're going to stay, then you may as well stay where you are and stay in the existing
I know
queue.
you will agree with this indeterminate time frame as a deterrent. Jerry Hand, you have a lot of experience with refugee camps around the world, the conditions and the psychological impact of staying somewhere for an unknown period of time. How long should people be sent to Nauru and Manus Island for, and how long is too long?
Well, a day is too long. But the reality is, there are people that have been in camps in Kenya, for argument's sake, for 20 years. There are kids that are approaching 20 who have never seen anything else. There are Palestinian camps. There are camps on the Thai border where kids have grown up and gone to school when they could, or worked as child labour, who have never known a day of freedom.
So if you're going to apply this policy literally, then you're going to have to do that as well.
Well, let me finish. As I said at the beginning, this is a package of proposals. They all have to be worked on, genuinely worked on, and implemented. Now, the idea is, obviously, is to slow down the boats, stop the boats. If that happened quickly, then there'd be very few people in Nauru, right? If it goes on for a while because people in certain political parties are probably encouraging them to come, the agents of the people smugglers, people will continue to come and more people will go into the camps. But the bottom line is, it's about fairness. It's about applying the UN Convention. It's about being part of the world and the whole UNHCR family. And therefore, if you willingly come here, and it's very hard, But it's hellish and hard for a woman at risk with 3 kids in a camp in Kenya. It's dreadful if you're in the north of Thailand as a woman with kids and you're there for 10 years and you're being raped and you're being bashed. That's unfair. You're not under the protection of Australia in a camp in Nauru. You're fighting for survival. Now, my issue on this whole thing has been from the day I become the minister was that you've got to comply with the whole of the convention. You've got to comply with the rules of the UNHCR as a nation, and you've got to actually be part of it. And to do that, you've got to make some tough decisions. As I said on the program a few weeks ago, this requires tough decisions. Not tough in terms of muscle, but hard decisions that people have to sit down and make, and it's not easy. And it's easy to stand up in the Parliament and say, this is unfair. Of course people being in custody is unfair. But people have got guns outside the camps around the world. And I've been to most of the camps. And the people are standing there guarding them and shooting them if they come out. So, I think if this is all implemented and the regional approach is adopted, I believe. Look, I was party to the Comprehensive Plan of Action. We repatriated Vietnamese out of Malaysia. I had wonderful cooperation from Malaysia. I had wonderful cooperation from Indonesia. That's good. Why is it so difficult to sit down with these people and do it again?
We're going to explore that. We do need to take a quick break. More to talk about on this. Stay with us.